The BTK Killer, How a Serial Killer Exposed Himself After 30 Years. Studio microphone of Voices from the Inside, original documentary, where the truth can't be locked away. The Letter That Broke the Silence. It's March 2004. Inside a quiet post office in Wichita, Kansas, a small padded envelope slides into the outgoing mail bin. No one pays attention. Just another piece of mail among hundreds. But inside that envelope lies something that will wake the ghosts of the past. A computer disk sent to a local TV station. The note attached says, "Can I communicate with you through this floppy disk? Be honest." When the news station opens it, the staff freezes. The disk isn't from an average viewer. It's from BTK, the same serial killer who vanished 25 years earlier after torturing and murdering families in the suburbs of Kansas. For decades, detectives, FBI agents, and terrified locals believed he was gone, maybe dead, maybe in prison for something else. But this disc meant he was back. The news station alerts Wichita police immediately. Within hours, the entire homicide division is reactivated. The case files come out of storage, thick folders filled with photographs, crime scene sketches, and taunting letters from the killer who once named himself. Bind, torture, kill. Detectives stare at the new evidence. A floppy disk. It feels almost comical, like something out of the past. But what they don't know is that this outdated piece of technology will be the mistake that finally ends BTK's decades-long reign of terror. They send the disk to a digital forensics lab. Within hours, technicians uncover a hidden trace, a Microsoft Word document that had been deleted but not fully wiped. Embedded metadata reveals the last person who saved the file, Christ Lutheran Church, registered to Dennis Rader. When the detective reads a name out loud, everyone goes silent. Who's Dennis Rader? A quick background check shows Dennis Lynn Rader, 59 years old, president of the church council, compliance officer for the city, a married father too, a man who goes to Sunday service every week. Could BTK really be him? That's where we begin. The moment a monster hidden behind a mask of faith and fatherhood finally exposes himself. The perfect neighbor. Before the world knew the name BTK, Wichita was just a calm Midwest town, clean streets, friendly neighbors, and unlocked doors. In the early 1970s, Dennis Rader blended right in. He lived a quiet life with his wife Paula and their young kids. He was the kind of man who'd wave to neighbors, mow his lawn on weekends, and help out at church picnics. But behind that normal face was a darkness that had been growing for years. Dennis had strange fantasies, ones he tried to bury under layers of normalcy. He dreamed about control, power, and domination. He'd later tell investigators that these thoughts began when he was a kid, when he'd watch stray cats and wonder what it would feel like to have total power over something living. In January 1974, that darkness finally took over. He'd been watching a family, the Oteros, for weeks. A hard-working couple with 3 children. They lived just a few blocks away. On the cold morning of January 15, 1974, Dennis walked into their home with a pistol and a plan. When it was over, both parents and 2 of their children were dead. The youngest, a little girl, had been the last to die. In terror and confusion, the crime shook Wichita to its core. For family members murdered in broad daylight, and no trace of who did it, the killer didn't just want to kill, he wanted recognition. A few months later, a letter arrived at the Wichita Eagle newspaper. It described the Otero murders in horrifying detail, information only the killer could know. The writer signed off with a chilling name. The code words for me will be, BTK, bind them, torture them, kill them. The name spread like wildfire. Wichita now had its own monster. The police received hundreds of tips, but nothing solid. BTK disappeared just as fast as he had appeared. Meanwhile, Dennis Rader went to work every day like nothing happened. He clocked in, smiled, and blended back into society. He was living 2 lives, one as a family man, and one as the faceless terror gripping Kansas. Years passed. New victims emerged, all women. He stalked them for weeks, sometimes months, learning their routines. He'd break into their homes, tie them up, and watch the light fade from their eyes. Then he'd clean up, go home and make dinner for his wife. No one suspected a thing. By 1991, the killing stopped. Or at least, that's what the world believed. BTK had vanished. Police assumed he was either dead, imprisoned, or reformed. But in reality, Dennis Rader was still alive, just quieter, more careful, and bored. Then, in 2004, 25 years after his last known murder, BTK started writing letters again. He couldn't help himself. He wanted to be remembered. He mailed packages to news stations, photos of crime scenes, and word puzzles for police. He teased detectives, bragging about his perfect crimes. But in his arrogance, he made one crucial mistake. He trusted technology he didn't understand. The floppy disk that traced back to his church wasn't just a slip. It was his downfall. The FBI began 24-hour surveillance on Dennis Rader. They followed him to work, to church, to his home. They needed proof, something physical to match his DNA. So they waited for the perfect opportunity. One day, his daughter Carrie was at college and had a routine pap smear test. The police quietly obtained that sample and compared to evidence from the old BTK crime scenes. When the results came in, the lab tech's voice cracked. It's a match. Dennis Rader, the family man, the church president, the city officer, was BTK, the man behind the mask. February 25th, 2005, a cold Friday afternoon in Park City, Kansas. Dennis Rader finishes lunch at his office, wipes his mouth neatly with a napkin, and packs his briefcase. His coworkers wave goodbye. See you Monday, Dennis. He smiles and nods. You bet. Minutes later, a convoy of unmarked police cars silently surround him. When he's pulled over, Rader looks confused, calm, but confused. Detective Ken Landwehr, who spent half his career chasing BTK, steps out and says, Mr. Rader, we have a warrant for your arrest. For what? Rader asks. BTK. For a second, the world stands still. Then he sighs, almost relieved. Well, he says, you got me. Inside the interrogation room, cameras roll. For decades, no one knew who BTK really was. Now, the world would finally see his face. But instead of a monster, they see a soft-spoken, ordinary man, balding, glasses, polite. He sits upright, hands folded like he's about to lead a church meeting. Detectives expected denial, maybe tears, maybe rage. What they got was something else entirely. Rader begins to talk, and he doesn't stop for over 30 hours. He explains everything in chilling detail, as if reciting a work presentation. He calls each murder a project. Each victim had a code name, a timeline, and a plan. He describes how he stalked them, learned their routines, and broke into their homes. Detectives stare in disbelief as he calmly describes the Otero family murders from 1974, how he cut the phone line, entered the house, and controlled the family one by one. He doesn't cry. He doesn't hesitate. He just talks, like he's proud. At one point, Detective Landwehr can't take it anymore. He asks, Dennis, do you understand what you did? You killed innocent people. Rader blinks slowly. I had to, he replies. It was part of me. I couldn't stop. I had these factors inside that I call demons. I compartmentalized them. He actually refers to himself in the third person. When BTK took over, he says Dennis didn't exist. It's a disturbing peek into how he separated his ordinary life from his monstrous one. He tells detectives that during the years between murders, he tried to control the urges by creating elaborate fantasies. He'd tie himself up alone in his basement, pretending to be both the killer and the victim. He took photos of himself dressed as his victims, wearing wigs, women's clothes, even masks made to look like faces. Then, he'd store those pictures in secret folders and boxes hidden around his home. When police searched his house later, what they found stunned them. Dozens of boxes filled with photos, sketches, and written confessions, blueprints of homes, Polaroids of him posing next to mannequins dressed like his victims, a trove of trophies, jewelry, driver's licenses, and clothing taken from the dead, all stored in neat, labeled containers. It was the mind of a man who saw murder as organization. And yet, during the day, Dennis Rader was the man people trusted. He was a Boy Scout leader, a city compliance officer, the guy who wrote citations if your grass was too tall. He gave safety speeches at schools. He attended church every Sunday. No one saw anything wrong. He'd smile at children, hug neighbors, volunteer at community events, all while carrying the weight of 10 murders. The revelation tore Wichita apart. For decades, everyone had imagined BTK as some shadowy figure, a drifter, a stranger, maybe someone passing through. But the truth was worse. He was one of them. People who had known Rader for years couldn't process it. He was just Dennis, one neighbor said. He helped me fix my mailbox. Another said, he'd stop to pet my dog every morning. I can't believe it. Even his wife, Paula, was in shock. When detectives told her who her husband really was, she fainted. She had no idea, not one clue. In over 30 years of marriage, she never suspected the man beside her had spent nights strangling strangers. The community's trust in everything, in neighbors and faith, in the safety of their small town, shattered overnight. When Rader appeared in court for the first time, the crowd gasped. He looked exactly like he always had, clean-shaven, quiet, ordinary. But when the judge asked if he understood the charges, 10 counts of first-degree murder, Rader shocked everyone again. "Yes, Your Honor," he said politely. "I understand. I committed those crimes." Then, instead of stopping there, he calmly described each killing, date, location, how he tied the victims, how long it took. The courtroom sat frozen as he gave a step-by-step confession, like he was reading from a manual. Even prosecutors were stunned by his emotionless precision. At one point, he paused and asked, "Would you like me to go into detail?" The judge, visibly shaken, said quietly, "No, Mr. Rader, that's enough." His calmness became the most disturbing part of all. Reporters called him the man with two faces. At church, he prayed for forgiveness. At home, he planned his next project. He'd been living as both sinner and saint, and no one had ever noticed. When asked why he started writing letters again after 25 years, he smiled and said, "I miss the attention. I guess I was just getting bored." That arrogance, that need to be remembered, is what finally undid him. It wasn't police brilliance that caught BTK. It was his own pride. On August 18th, 2005, Dennis Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, one for each life he took. But even as the sentence was read, he didn't cry. He didn't beg. He just nodded, quietly acknowledging his fate, a man stripped of everything except his ego. As he was led away, his final words to the courtroom were chilling. "Because of what I've done, society has to put me away. I accept that." He gave a small smile to the judge, as if this was just another routine meeting at church. In prison, Rader still writes letters. He signs them BTK. He says he's found peace with God. But even behind bars, he enjoys the power of being remembered, of knowing that the name BTK still sends shivers down the American spine. The psychology of a hidden killer. The human mind is capable of both love and destruction, and Dennis Rader's mind lived perfectly between those two extremes. For 30 years, the world saw him as a model citizen. But deep inside, there was something darker, something that psychologists would later call a controlled storm. After his arrest, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit flew to Kansas to study him. They'd seen serial killers before: Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy. But Rader was different. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't erratic. He was methodical. He planned everything. He was what experts called an organized serial killer. But what shocked them most was how normal he appeared. When the FBI profiler sat across from Rader in the interview room, he smiled politely. "Would you like me to explain my phases?" he asked. The profiler nodded. Rader leaned forward and began explaining the steps of his murders like a teacher giving a lesson. He described something he called the BTK cycle. It began with the trolling phase, when he'd drive around town looking for potential victims. He'd spot a woman or family that caught his attention and begin what he called project development. He'd stalk them for days, sometimes months, learning when they left home, when they slept, and even when their lights went off at night. Then came the fantasy phase. He'd imagine how the crime would unfold. He drew detailed sketches of his victims bound in ropes, always with himself standing nearby, watching. The planning phase came next, preparing tools, disguises, and escape routes. Finally, the kill. Afterward, he entered what he called the cooling-off period. He'd go back to family life, pretending nothing happened, until the hunger returned. It was a cycle he said he couldn't escape. Like an addiction, he didn't want to cure her. He said the thrill wasn't about the killing itself. It was about the control, the moment when he decided who lived and who died. He told the FBI, it was never about hate. It was about power. Psychologists later studied Rader's brain activity through interviews, cognitive tests, and behavioral analysis. They found he had no remorse, none. He could describe his murders in vivid detail without emotion, but could tear up when talking about his daughter's college graduation. That contradiction, empathy in one life, emptiness in another, was what made him so terrifying. He wasn't born a killer in the shadows. He was raised in broad daylight. Dennis was born on March 9th, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas. His childhood wasn't filled with abuse or violence. In fact, he described it as normal. But as a boy, he began to fantasize about binding people. He admitted to torturing animals as a child, an early sign psychologists recognized as a red flag for sociopathy. As he grew older, he learned to hide those urges behind discipline. He joined the Air Force, served honorably, and later earned a degree in criminal justice. He even said he once dreamed of becoming a police officer. Ironically, that dream became part of his fantasy. He loved the idea of authority, of enforcing rules by day and breaking them by night. When he married Paula in 1971, she believed she'd found a loyal, church-going husband. He was loyal in appearance. He mowed the lawn, paid the bills, tucked the kids in. But every time she left the house, he slipped into another role. He'd wear disguises. He'd take photographs of himself tied up, gagged, pretending to be both victim and executioner. He even built secret hideouts in the woods, small underground boxes where he'd keep stolen clothes and mementos from his victims. Psychologists later called him the suburban chameleon. He could blend into any environment. He knew exactly what emotions to fake, and he believed that as long as he controlled his outward image, no one could ever see the truth inside. One FBI profiler asked him, "Dennis, you went years without killing. Didn't you ever think of stopping completely?" He smiled faintly. "I thought I could. But the thing is, you can't stop being who you are. It's like being hungry. You can ignore it for a while, but eventually you have to eat." That chilling self-awareness made experts realize they weren't dealing with insanity. He wasn't delusional. He wasn't hearing voices. He was conscious. He knew what he was doing and chose to do it anyway. He told investigators he often prayed after his crimes, not for forgiveness, but for gratitude that he didn't get caught. In 2005, forensic psychologist Dr. Catherine Ramsland began a series of interviews with Rader for a detailed criminal study. Over the course of a decade, she learned more about his mind than anyone else. He described his life as divided between two personalities, Dennis the family man and BTK the monster. He claimed Dennis was good, loyal, faithful, caring. BTK, he said, was something else entirely, a presence that took over. But psychologists didn't buy it. They said Dennis Rader wasn't two men. He was one man who enjoyed playing both roles. Dr. Ramsland noted how he spoke with pride about his control, often smiling when describing how he fooled everyone around him. He said, I liked the challenge. It was like a game. The police were smart, but I was smarter. His arrogance had no limits, even from behind bars. He'd correct reporters if they got crime scene details wrong. He once wrote a letter saying, "If you're going to write about BTK, at least get it right." He still wanted to be remembered. Even as a killer, he wanted to be perfect. Psychologists say Rader's case reveals one of the most dangerous kinds of evil, functional evil, when a person is capable of living a perfectly ordinary life while committing horrors in secret. He wasn't driven by revenge or greed. He killed for the satisfaction of control. To him, people weren't people. They were props in his fantasies. He once told investigators, "It wasn't about the body. It was about the picture in my head. And yet, when he talks about his daughter, his voice softens. He says she's the best thing he ever did. The same man who tied up children in their homes weeps when recalling her childhood smile. That's the duality of Dennis Rader, the walking contradiction that still confuses experts to this day. Today, BTK sits in a solitary cell at El Dorado Correctional Facility, Kansas. He's 80 years old, thin, gray-haired, and spends most of his time writing letters and drawing sketches of his past projects. He still signs every piece of paper the same way. BTK, your old friend. Prison staff say he remains polite, calm, and eerily normal. He reads the Bible every morning. He attends chapel. But when questioned about remorse, he answers, "I'm sorry for what happened, but it's in the past now." The psychologists say that single line defines who he really is. A man who sees horror as history, not tragedy. August 19th, 2005. One day after Dennis Rader is sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms without the chance of parole. As the prison van leaves the courthouse, the man once known as BTK stares out the window at the crowd gathered outside. Reporters, survivors, and curious locals hold cameras high, hoping for one last glimpse. Rader smiles faintly, not at them, but at the attention. He knows that for the rest of his life, people will still be saying his name, and that, to him, is power. When he arrives at El Dorado Correctional Facility, guards expect an uncooperative, dangerous man. Instead, he greets them politely. "Good afternoon, officers," he says, extending his hand as if he's checking into a hotel. He's processed, stripped of his clothes, and given a prison jumpsuit. His glasses stay on, his only link to the man he used to be. He's placed in solitary confinement for his own safety. Other inmates already know who he is. Some call him a legend. Others want him dead. His cell is small, roughly 8 by 10 feet. Concrete walls, a steel bed, a toilet, no television, no physical contact, no privacy. Yet even here, in total isolation, Rader finds a new stage. Within weeks, he begins writing letters, not to family, but to journalists, professors, and crime enthusiasts. He wants people to study him, to analyze him, to remember him. He addresses some letters to whom it may concern, others to my public. In one, he writes, "I'm doing fine here. I have a lot of time to think. Maybe my story will help others understand what makes people like me tick." He starts signing every letter with BTK, sometimes underlined, as if branding his name into the page. It's not remorse. It's control. He no longer has victims to bind or torture, but he can still manipulate how he's remembered. Prison officials eventually intercept dozens of letters. Some are harmless reflections about his daily life. Others include disturbing sketches of tied-up women or project plans he never acted on. The Kansas Department of Corrections bans him from sending out certain letters after families of victims begin receiving unwanted mail. Still, he finds loopholes, passing notes through approved contacts or journalists who agree to forward them. Among those who correspond with him is Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a forensic psychologist who seeks to understand how his mind works. She starts a series of letters that turn into a years-long study. Through those letters, Rader begins to reconstruct his entire criminal timeline, step by step, killing by killing, thought by thought. He tells Ramsland that he's documenting history, but what he's really doing is building his own myth. Inside his cell, he divides his time between reading the Bible and writing. He calls his notebook the BTK Journal. He writes as if he's both author and historian, chronicling the life of a famous case study. He once wrote, "I'm not proud of what I did, but I am proud of my understanding of myself." That line reveals everything about who Dennis Rader truly is, a man obsessed with control and recognition. He sends lists of his favorite authors, favorite foods, even the daily routine of his prison life. He writes that he eats breakfast at 5 a.m., exercises in his cell by doing slow-motion jumping jacks, and prays every night for forgiveness, not from his victims, but from God. He says he's forgiven himself because God knows the truth about my demons. Prison guards notice something strange about him. He never yells, never curses, never breaks rules. He says, "Sir," and "thank you." He cleans his cell meticulously, aligning his shoes and folded clothes like a soldier. But at night, some officers hear him talking to himself. Sometimes he whispers prayers. Other times, he repeats the words, bind, torture, kill, over and over, almost like a mantra. They say he does it softly, rhythmically, as if he's trying to remind himself who he used to be. When Dr. Ramsland visits him for interviews, she notices he speaks about BTK in the third person, like he's discussing a separate individual. He says things like, BTK was my dark side. Dennis is different. Dennis wants peace. But when she challenges him, asking if Dennis was the one who planned every crime, he smiles slightly and says, well, Dennis had to help BTK survive. That quiet admission shows his lifelong delusion. He doesn't see himself as guilty. He sees himself as divided, one part evil, one part normal, and he believes that as long as he keeps them separate, he's still in control. In 2016, Dr. Ramsland publishes a detailed book about him, Confession of a Serial Killer, the untold story of Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. Every page of it comes from his words, his handwriting, his perspective. It's chilling not just for what he did, but for how calmly he talks about it. He describes his crimes as projects, his victims as targets, and his fantasies as daydreams. He even writes about his post-crime rituals, revisiting the scenes in his mind, reliving every second like a movie replaying in his head. To him, those memories are trophies he can still keep, even in a cell. In 2019, letters from BTK start leaking online through true crime communities. Some collectors trade them like baseball cards. Each letter carries that eerie handwritten signature, BTK, with perfect penmanship. To them, it's a piece of infamy. To the victims' families, it's a wound reopened. One survivor said, he's still playing his game, only now his prison cell is a stage. And it's true. Even behind steel bars, Dennis Rader continues to perform. He carefully crafts his image as the cooperative killer, the one who tells a story to help others understand evil. But those who've read his letters know he still enjoys the power of being studied. In one of his most recent letters, written in 2023, he complained about how people misunderstood him. He wrote, they see BTK as a monster. I see him as a case of human malfunction. There's a difference. He ended that letter with a small, smiley face drawn next to his initials. Even now, decades later, Dennis Rader still sees himself as the narrator of his own legend, and that's what chills investigators the most. BTK isn't haunted by his crimes. He's haunted by the idea of being forgotten. For most people in Wichita, Kansas, the name BTK isn't just a headline, it's a scar. Even decades later, the city carries an unspoken weight. Behind every family barbecue, every Sunday sermon, and every quiet suburban street lies a shared memory of fear, betrayal, and broken trust. Because BTK wasn't some distant monster hiding in the woods. He was the neighbor next door, the man who waved every morning, the church leader who prayed for forgiveness from the same pulpit where some of his victims once sat. When Dennis Rader was finally caught, many believed the story had ended. But for the people who lived through his reign of terror, it never really did. The aftermath left invisible wounds, the kind that no sentence could heal. In the years following his arrest, survivors and families of the victims gathered in small community centers and churches to grieve together. They didn't want fame. They didn't want interviews. They wanted answers, ones that still don't exist. Shirley Vian's son once said in a TV interview, I used to think about what I'd say to him if I ever met him. But there's nothing to say. You can't reason with evil. For them, forgiveness wasn't possible. Not because they didn't want peace, but because BTK's crimes weren't just about killing bodies. They destroyed entire lives. When the Otero family murders happened back in 1974, it was like a thunderclap that split Wichita in two. 4 lives, gone in one morning. The surviving children, Charlie and Danny, came home from school to find the unimaginable. For years, they lived with guilt, asking themselves, why weren't we home? They grew up haunted by that day. During the sentencing in 2005, one of the Otero children, now an adult, faced Rader in court. His voice trembled, but his words cut deep. You took my parents. You took my brother and sister. You took my childhood. You don't get to take my peace, too. Rader sat quietly, eyes forward, expression calm, as if listening to a church sermon. He didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't apologize. And that, to many, was worse than anything else. For Wichita residents, the fear he planted changed everything about how they lived. Back in the 1970s and 80s, people began locking their doors for the first time. Hardware stores couldn't keep deadbolts in stock. Neighborhood watch programs popped up everywhere. Women learned to check their rear-view mirrors and leave lights on overnight. The entire community lived with a silent rule: trust no one. It wasn't until his arrest that they realized the horrifying irony. The man who made them afraid of strangers was never a stranger at all. He lived among them, worked beside them, smiled at them every day. Wichita police officers who worked the BTK case for years also struggled to heal. Some retired early. Others developed PTSD. Detective Ken Landwehr, the man who led the task force that caught Rader, later admitted in an interview that he couldn't sleep for weeks after hearing Rader's confession. He said, "I expected to see a monster. What I saw was an ordinary man talking about murder like it was his job." Even for seasoned investigators, that realization was haunting, because if someone like Dennis Rader could live unnoticed for 30 years, who else could be out there? The victims' families found different ways to keep their loved ones' memories alive. Some created scholarships in their names. Others wrote books or gave talks at universities about trauma, resilience, and survival. But every one of them shared the same pain, that the story of their loved one was forever tied to BTK. As one victim's relative said, "He took their lives, and then he took their names. When people hear their names now, they think of him." That's the cruelest part of all, the way monsters like BTK rewrite history so that their victims become footnotes in their own crimes. Yet, despite everything, Wichita never let him win completely. The town rebuilt. The fear faded, slowly, stubbornly. Churches stayed open. Kids played in parks again. And people began to speak his name not out of terror, but out of understanding, to make sure it never happened again. The police department even turned the BTK investigation into a case study, one taught in law enforcement training programs nationwide. It became a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a badge, or a wedding ring, or a church pin. In the years that followed, filmmakers, authors, and criminologists all tried to tell the BTK story. But for the people of Wichita, it was never entertainment. It was a warning, a reminder that vigilance and faith don't always live in the same house. Every so often, reporters still visit the neighborhood where the Oteros once lived. They find new families there now. Children playing, dogs barking, sunlight glinting off freshly washed cars. Time has healed the surface, but beneath it, the ghosts remain. One elderly neighbor, who lived through the killings and still remembers the day police filled the street, said quietly, "I don't talk about it much, but every time I see a new neighbor move in, I pray they never have to know what the street saw." And somewhere hundreds of miles away, in a small concrete cell in El Dorado, Kansas, the man responsible sits alone, still drawing, still writing, still pretending he's relevant. He reads his Bible. He folds his letters neatly. He imagines people still whispering his name. But what he doesn't realize is that Wichita has finally reclaimed something he can't control anymore, their peace. Because while Dennis Rader still tries to shape his legacy with letters and interviews, the world now knows the truth. His legacy isn't power. It's pain. And every family he hurt, every survivor who speaks his name, turns that pain into something he never expected: strength. Today, the BTK case remains a permanent reminder in American history that evil can hide in plain sight, that justice sometimes takes decades, and that healing, no matter how slow, always finds its way through the cracks. The name BTK once stood for bind, torture, kill, but for Wichita, Kansas, it now stands for something else: bravery, tenacity, knowledge, the courage to face the truth, no matter how horrifying it is. For 30 long years, Dennis Rader, the man the world came to know as BTK, walked among ordinary people, shaking hands, leading prayers, raising children and writing city ordinances, all while hiding a darkness too deep to comprehend. He wasn't the monster hiding under the bed. He was the man who tucked you in at night. That's what makes a story different from every other serial killer. He proved that evil doesn't always wear blood. Sometimes it wears a smile. When the world finally saw his true face, it shattered something fundamental, our sense of trust. Because if someone like him could exist unnoticed for decades, what does that say about how much we really know the people around us? But here's the truth. Monsters like BTK feed on fear and fame. They want their names remembered, their crimes analyzed, their faces plastered across screens forever. That's why the real victory isn't just that Dennis Rader was caught. The real victory is that Wichita and the families he tore apart refused to let his name define them. They chose to live, to rebuild, and to make sure his story became more than horror. It became a warning. So when we talk about BTK today, we're not glorifying him. We're exposing him, pulling the mask off evil and showing what it really looks like when it hides in plain sight. And that's what stories like this are for. Not to fear evil, but to understand it, so we can see it next time before it smiles back at us. Because in the end, BTK's legacy isn't power. It's proof that justice, though slow, always finds a way. Studio microphone voices from inside, where the truth can't be locked away. If you found this story powerful, eye-opening, or chilling in any way, don't let it disappear into the silence. Backhand index pointing right, like, comment, and subscribe to Voices from the Inside, where every story reveals the truth most people never hear.